Click. All right, we're good now. I think we're live.
And welcome to today's edition of the NBA Strategy Show. It is November 17th. It is a Thursday. We will be playing Thursday morning quarterback. All right. And we had quite a bit of action yesterday. It's a big slate on Wednesday. We talked about the Luka news, some Raptor stuff. Matt, how did your Wednesday go?
It ended up going okay. There were games that I bet too much on relative to what I would have wanted, and then there were games that were the opposite. So the Luca game went well. I think I didn't play it properly, and the results were nowhere near probably what they should have been. Um, the Mavericks scored
So
nine.
what mistakes do you think you made?
Okay, so the Mavericks, when Luca first got ruled out, dropped from minus. It was about 8.5 when we got that news, and we kind of knew we were getting that news. Like if you look at the show yesterday, we were pretty confident that was happening. Um, the line initially reopened at 4.5, and within a matter of like 30 seconds, it was back up to 5.5, and then
Five and a
eventually
half.
6.5. So the actual best bet yesterday, I think, was Dallas minus 4.5, and I was a little hesitant because I hadn't readjusted the numbers yet. But given the way this rating sheet works, like the math is already there. As you can see for today, Paul George estimated 4.5 points. If he is ruled out, the line will drop. The projected line will drop from about 11.5 to 7. So we had that information for Luca. I just didn't trust it enough, and I wasn't fast enough, and then I missed the Dallas bet. But the lucky part is they didn't even win. So it would have been nice to have more on that, but ultimately it wouldn't have been because the results were bad. But then the bet that I probably had too much on was the under, which I thought would drop more. And you were right. Facundo Campazzo plays very, very fast, and the pace with him on the court was probably higher than it is with Luca. So that was something we probably could have spent more time on, or I could have acknowledged more, because the total for the game went from 221 and a half to 216 and a half before closing at 218 and a half. So to have a multi-unit bet on like under 221, the value was like 2.5 points. Like it wasn't really that special. But there ended up only being 193 in the game because Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith both missed every single wide open shot that they got for the whole game. So it worked out fine. Not for those props. Dinwiddie hit his assist prop, but neither of them got close on points. So it was
Yeah.
just a weird game because,
Yeah.
Dallas just did not play offense, really.
Yeah, this is some staggering stats here. Dinwiddie went 3 for 18, 1 for 9 from downtown. Dorian Finney-Smith went 1 for 8 from downtown and 3 for 11 from the field. Like, these guys just don't do that very often. And
No.
when that happens, they're going to get beat.
Yeah, so I guess like looking at the rating sheet, I could have given more of a manual downgrade to Dallas for the fatigue. Like, but did we expect them to be that tired? Like, they already had a bit of a manual. So just to like backtrack on this,
Were they
538.
actually tired or did they just shoot poorly?
I don't know. I mean, watching it, it looked like both.
Fair.
Like they shot worse than even a tired player should be expected to shoot.
Right.
Even a guy who had played 48 minutes or 53 in an overtime game, like even that player shouldn't have shot as bad as Dinwiddie shot. But 538 already prices in the fact that it was a back-to-back in their travel adjustment, which is the first tab there. And then I gave another point downgrade manually because it wasn't just a back-to-back, it was a close game. And Jason Kidd talked about like both Doncic and Dinwiddie needing potential rest. So
Yeah, those guys played like probably 3 to 5 extra minutes than they normally play in that game. So, that we read the tea leaves correctly and it actually played out pretty well. So,
yeah, I think we were directionally accurate on everything. It was just a matter of degree where I think it could have been better. But the overall result of that game was good because the under came in pretty easily, and then you know I I couldn't get enough down when Jokic got ruled out the night before. We didn't even talk about it on the show because he had been ruled out previously. The Knicks won. That would have been a bet. Like I would have loved to have like 10 units on, but only had one unit because there's only so much you can get sometimes on the overnight lines.
Well, the overnight lines, not only do they not all post them, but they don't post the full thing. So you may get a spread, but you won't get a money line. You won't get
Right.
these other options where when you're limited on a book and you're trying to get some action down, you sometimes got to go into different places.
Or you can get a spread and a money line, but there's no team total available, or there
Right.
aren't any alternate spreads where you can bet like a bunch of different things. And they just, yeah. So it was, it would have been better if Jokic got ruled out for COVID or whatever it is, he's in health and safety protocols, like the day of, then it would have been more of an opportunity. But I was really happy with the Toronto game. They played.
So how did that play out for you? Because I know Bam got ruled out. We were sweating Gary Trent Jr. and Fred VanVleet. I don't remember who ended up playing on the Toronto side.
So Trent didn't play, but VanVleet did. And Bam didn't play. Hero never showed up on the injury report again. Like he was, I guess, doubtful, and they just didn't mention him.
Gotcha.
So he was nowhere close to playing. But
how did we talked about the total in that game being low with Hero out, right? I'm actually going back.
The game actually pushed the total 112, 104
really?
For a 216 total. I had no bet on the total.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. It was we got mixed information on the total because Bam being out is good for the over, but Trent being out is good for the under.
Right,
Hero
we
being
did
out
talk
is
about
good
that.
for the under. So it just like there was nothing. I think we were only really interested in the total if all of the news broke in the same direction, and they kind of like
Yeah, I agree
staggered.
with that.
Yeah. But Toronto was plus 1.5 when we did the show, and when Bam got ruled out, they went from plus 1.5 to minus 1.5 really quickly. So being ready, like we talked, like that was a day yesterday where just being on top of the news as fast as possible was going to be essential. So I was in at Toronto plus 1.5. They went to minus 1.5. And then when VanVleet got ruled in, the Trent update didn't do anything. He's not really that important anyway. When VanVleet got ruled in, they ended up minus 3. And then they won by 8. So, yeah, it just like the line moved 4.5 points. They struggled early, but ended up covering with relative ease. So overall, that was just like a well-played game.
Yep.
Just much cleaner than the Dallas situation for sure. And that was really the big thing. I mean, do you want to talk about what happened with Drew Holiday in Milwaukee? Like we were trying to bet the Bucks, and then it was the Cavs, and then the Bucks ended up winning.
We're all wrapped up with Miami and Toronto. I know we had talked about the Pacers or the Hornets at some point. I don't know if you ended up on them or not.
Yeah.
But the Cleveland and the Bucks game, I'm interested in how that played out for you.
Okay. So we had the line at Milwaukee minus 4, and my hunch was that Mitchell and Drew would both play, but Mitchell was a bit less likely because we didn't get any sort of update that he had practiced throughout the week, and he had missed Sunday's game. Holiday had been out a couple games, but we did get an update 24 hours earlier.
Yeah, he was practicing.
That he was practicing. Yeah. So
we did get a midday Mitchell practiced, right? Or went through shoot around.
We did get that. So at that point, I was basically ready to bet nothing because we had talked about just like put a little bit on the Bucks early, and then if Mitchell's out, put a lot on the Bucks. So I did my small Bucks bet, and then Mitchell ended up going through shoot around. I was like, all right, I'll just leave it as is. Like it'll be fine. There was a tiny bit of value on Milwaukee. And then Drew out of nowhere got ruled out. Like we didn't even get a downgrade or anything. He went from questionable but trending probable to just out. And at that point, I was like, all right, I'll hedge out of Milwaukee and bet some on Cleveland. It was like a 3/4 of a unit bet or something. Because Drew got ruled out. Pat Connaughton also got ruled out. He had been upgraded to probable from questionable. So that was surprising. And Connaughton
plays decent defense too, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like a relevant rotation player.
He's relevant, especially because they have some pretty
thin
bad
right now,
guys.
right?
Yeah, for sure. So he's kind of good, and they don't really have a deep team right now, especially with Middleton out. Grayson Allen is out. So the line ended up moving to like 1.5. So I was in at like Cavs plus 3.5 with the new bet, and then the Bucks just ended up winning by a lot. Like I'm overall just very confusing game.
The Brook Lopez 29-point game.
Yeah, on his brother. We found out what the answer to that was.
How little offense we literally brought that up yesterday. He must have been. I wonder if they put his brother on him. I gotta go find that.
I was watching SportsCenter last night, and they showed one highlight of Brook hitting a jumper over Robin.
Yep.
And then
Put
there was
Demon as
another
the
play.
runner.
There was a drive and kick where Robin was guarding the guy who drove. They kicked it out to Brook, and Robin just like fell into the paint. Like Brook was wide open. I don't know if it was his fault, but miscommunication. Like the Robin did not defend Brook at all. Like it was as if he didn't know him. So that didn't matter. He's just bad. Robin Lopez is just really, really bad.
Understood. No argument here.
It would have been great if they just didn't play him, but yeah. So what I don't really like. The news didn't break anywhere close to what we thought, and sometimes that just happens. Like
Yep.
we're not like literally
Yeah, I mean
in
we're
the
always
know.
building estimations here,
Yeah.
right? Like today, Paul George is probably somewhere between 30 and 60% to sit today, right? Based
Sure.
on however the day goes, we got to make those judgment calls based on which side of that 30 or 60 is he more likely to be on, and be ready for a couple different options, hopefully.
Yeah, I think so. If we want to go into today a bit, I think that's probably a good estimate where you just had him at. Like we don't really know. And looking at that line too, like Paul George is worth 4.5 points, but we've got a line that's essentially set at a midpoint of where it'll be if he's in or out.
So you think it'll settle somewhere between like 7 or 11 based on him?
Yeah, let's
on
see
the
what we
final
got.
news.
So yeah, 9.5 right now. I don't think it necessarily moves to those numbers. That's just what the fair line would be.
Right.
I think if he's out, it gets a bit lower. Like I think it's skewed a little more towards Detroit. So if he is ruled out, I think the fair line is 7, and it'll actually move to about 7. And if he's in, the fair line's 11.5. Maybe it moves to like 10.5. I think the books are probably under accounting for George just a bit because they don't realize how bad Marcus Morris, Norman Powell, John Wall, like these guys all have negative player ratings. I just want to show the Clippers for a second because, I mean, again, this is one rating system. It doesn't necessarily mean it's perfect, but it's a good rating system, and all these guys like Wall, Batum and Zubac are average, but Jackson's negative, Morris is negative, Powell's negative.
I think I'm seeing a FanDuel screen right now.
Did it not?
But
No, I think I got it over to the ratings now. Unless it's
There it is,
lagging
okay.
behind.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah, so Wall, Jackson, Morris, Powell, it's all in this this column over here. Are their
Yep.
total ratings. Well, I guess that's adjusted for minutes, but if we just look at their per 48 ratings here, that'll bring in Luke Kennard, who's out, but -1, Amir Coffey, negative. Yeah, most of their team has a negative player rating. Paul George is amazing, and his backups are all bad. So he's quite important. So I think that the books currently are just undervaluing George and Leonard and overvaluing everyone else on the Clippers. So I think, yeah, the Pistons are going to look pretty good if you get him at +9.5 if George is out. I have no idea if he's going to play or not. Like, that one seems totally up in the air.
Did they play last night?
No, the Clippers.
Or they front end?
They played a back-to-back that ended 2 nights ago. So this would be the third game in 4 nights.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's relevant.
They had the semi-blowout win in Houston, but then a really, really tough game in Dallas where I think Paul George played the entire second half. I may have that wrong.
He played 41. Yes, actually, I was watching that game. I think he played 24 straight minutes to end the game.
And that was also why Luka played more because the Clippers were coming back. I think Luka only sat like 1 minute in the second half of that game. They both started the fourth quarter right. I was watching it too. The broadcast was like, wow, they're both still in the game. This is strange. That was abnormal for both of their rotations. So it makes sense that George could get a game off. Like, they're playing Detroit at home. This is not a game that has any implication on the Western Conference standings. And then they come back Saturday. They're playing a home game against San Antonio, which, like, you could say San Antonio is not a playoff team, but it is a Western Conference team that's only a couple games under 500. Like, that does...
if you had to pick between the Pistons and the Spurs, you'd rather beat the Spurs.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
Yeah, so it is a hand injury, but you could also argue they're going to rest him. So I actually think I lean towards George sitting, but I think it's pretty close to 50-50.
All right, so that is the main piece for today. I feel like this Spurs-Kings line and this Nets-Blazers is just kind of whatever. If we happen to get surprise news, then great, maybe we can act on it, but I'm assuming these are going to be sit outs for us today.
Yeah, just quickly on these games. So I have a manual bump for both Portland and Sacramento now because these are two teams that I think the market is saying a different thing than 538 is saying. And I want to kind of like bridge the gap there. Like we've been anti Portland and anti Sacramento a lot. And
but maybe they're better than we thought.
Maybe they're better than we thought. Yeah. Like Jeremy Grant has
Fair.
a negative rating. He may just not,
he may not be negative. I agree with that.
Yeah. And then for Sacramento, I'm still inclined to believe that they're bad, but De'Aaron Fox is playing really well. Maybe his rating is too low. I do think the potential value that we could get here, though, is Keegan Murray's questionable. At this point in his career, I don't think he's a really relevant player in terms of wins and losses. And if he's in, we could see the line bump back up, and then there's a larger gap, like there's a larger edge there. Maybe the Kings go to -8 if Murray is ruled in. And then the Spurs at +8 look pretty good with a projected line at, a little under 6. But I actually think that's kind of unlikely. Like, I think the line's just going to stay where it is, and we're going to do nothing.
I doubt Murray moves the line.
Yeah, so probably nothing there. I do think Nurkic probably is not playing tonight, though. That's kind of a weird one. That's kind of a weird one because he was out for a few games with a quad injury and then returned versus San Antonio. But then he lost all of his minutes to Drew Eubanks. Well, first of all, Jakob Poeltl scored on him like every possession.
Yeah, Poeltl had 31 and 14 that game.
And look at the plus minus for them too.
Nurkic played 15 minutes. Okay, so this is like super like Eubanks played 33, Nurkic played 15. So
and Nurkic was like a -20 and Eubanks was like a +25, if I have that right.
-21 and +28. Wow.
So Nurkic was playing terribly, and they put in Eubanks and went on a run.
There's no reality where Eubanks is a better player than Nurkic, right?
No, I think what it is that Eubanks had a lucky game, but Nurkic was playing hurt. And they may just be like, he needs to go back and rest a bit more before we use him.
I mean, Eubanks didn't do shit. He had 9 points and 7 boards. He just was on the floor more.
When he was on the court, Anthony Simons made a lot of threes.
Gotcha.
It was just the way the game went. The Spurs were up by like 9, and Eubanks was in, and then they made a big run with Lillard and Simons, and I mean, Eubanks had like a couple baskets, but he just happened to be out there. But this is more about Nurkic not playing well than it is about Eubanks. So I lean towards Nurk sitting.
I don't need to hold a bias here and just assume Nurk's gonna just be 100% and play, fully over here. But I can't imagine this happens again. Like, 15 minutes couldn't have been the plan, right? And how hurt could he? I don't know.
He did not play his normal fourth quarter stint. So it might have been a combination of his leg bothering him and his poor play, and then just the fact, like, when a team is on a run, sometimes they'll just leave the 5 guys on the court who are making the run. Like, there's no way they came into the game like Nurk's only playing 15 minutes. It's just the way the game went.
It seems impossible. It seems like it should have been 33-15 the other way around.
Yeah. Or, I think normally they go like 26, 16, and then like 6 to 8 minutes of a small ball lineup. Something like that.
All right. So Nurkic's usually worth a couple points. Do you have him projected in or out?
He's projected in. I have him. He's only worth an estimated 2 now. It was 2.5 like a couple games ago. The reason for that is his current minutes projection is a little bit down. So he's not as important because he was already projected to play a few less minutes, just based on like the rotation recently. There's no bet here either way.
Yep.
So that's, I mean, maybe Kevin Durant sits or something and we get lucky, but yeah, at present time, there's nothing super interesting about this slate. Unless, some props come up for Clippers guys related to Paul George, and then we have some opportunities. Right now, I don't see anything on any sites, though.
All right. I think I agree with all that. Anything else you want to cover before we look at futures or some other stuff?
Yeah, so let's just very quickly talk about, like, logistics of bet timing. Because yesterday was one where it was just, with so much news happening at the same time and just the whole day, like, and also with the sportsbooks getting faster at like pulling lines off the board when something breaks, like, if you're going to do betting this way, you sort of have to know the ins and outs of like which sportsbook is going to hang the line for longer. or you're just like already logged in with bets in the bet slip and you're just ready to submit them. So I don't.
Stay ready.
Yeah, it's like it's one of two things. Like we talked about it yesterday, maybe it was 2 days ago, a little bit. Like if you load up a bet slip on with a same game parlay on sites that have that, you will have a bit more of like a lag before those are removed.
So
So
let's talk about Clippers stuff. This is a perfect example, right? Because let's just pretend Paul George is only 20%, even though it's lower than we estimated earlier, right? That is plenty of value to say, okay, Reggie Jackson. I don't even necessarily know the order after Reggie Jackson of like usage and where it would go, but most guys are going to be really good value if George sits, right?
yeah, we just don't have him yet. But let's assume, just for argument's sake, okay, I'm gonna let's see what we got here. Okay, I'm gonna pull up the same game parlay and see what we have. I don't know if any players are. Yeah, okay, they've got nothing. We're gonna have to use another game as a proxy for this. Let's go into Spurs Kings. We're just gonna have to, assume that these are the Clippers players. But if you go with something like, I don't know, well, let's say De'Aaron Fox is just Reggie Jackson. We're using him as Reggie Jackson, and this is Spurs plus 6.5. This is your Pistons line. You can add this to the bet slip. It may take a while. But the point there is that already being in your bet slip will save you time. Like, and that won't get deleted from the bet slip throughout the day. So that's not the only site where you can do that. You can kind of do that at most of them. But those sort of little tricks, like time saving tricks, if you're trying to beat injury news, they can be really important. The other thing is like, I think everyone's using Underdog, but the actual source is going to be faster, like a decent amount of the time. So I don't know if people want to.
That wasn't true yesterday, right? I think I saw you were on Twitter and there was a guy that Underdog posted the news 8 seconds before the source did.
No, it was the reverse. It was for Dwayne Dedman. The source had it first. It was Ira Winderman of the Heat.
I misread the tweet.
Yeah, he had it. I mean, maybe that's just because it was Dwayne Dedman and Underdog didn't have the urgency on him. But I was trying to track it yesterday. It was about 50-50 who was first. So if you're looking at both, you're going to get the earlier one regardless. What I'm describing is either having push notifications for all the important beat writers in the league, which could be very annoying.
That's your job.
Or you could just have like a tweet deck set up and look at it. Those are the two ways.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to get into our some of the guys we follow over time. That's a long-term conversation, yeah. I think. But eventually you'll probably be sharing the type of beat writers you respect and the ones there's probably a couple you don't trust as much, and we'll either figure that stuff out or we'll get there for sure.
Yeah, there are some weird quirks that I think are like can be big money makers. Like for instance, the Grizzlies PR Twitter account. If you know we're on like a Ja Morant or Desmond Bane questionable day, I will turn on push notifications for their PR account because they're tweeting it directly from the team, and Underdog has to like sift through. I don't know how their algorithm really works or Fantasy Labs or how it worked or whatever, but they basically just post a list of like all the names that are the injury report, and then one by one you get the Underdog tweet. But if you just do the push notification for the team tweet, for that team specifically, it doesn't necessarily work for every team. You'll get your Morant or Bane news before everyone else does by like 5 to 10 seconds, which
is a lot in basketball.
It can be a lot. Yeah. I think the days where, this used to be the case for me, probably all pre-COVID, like sports betting was legalized in Jersey in 2018. So let's call it 2018-19 and the pre-COVID portion of 2020. You could just have the like fantasy notification on, get an update, and have like a solid 4 or 5 minutes to make whatever bet seemed appropriate to that situation. Like I remember when Kevin Durant got ruled out and I was able to like log into an app bet, log into another app bet, log into another, like it was just, they were very slow. That doesn't exist anymore.
Inefficient markets get more efficient over time.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a good way of saying it and very relevant here. So
Yes.
it it's still inefficient. It's just not nearly as inefficient. Yeah, it's gotten
Sure.
more efficient. They've gotten better at like the all the sports books understand the value of like individual NBA players and whether they're in or out to a better degree now, but they don't understand it completely. Like you could argue maybe there shouldn't even be a Clippers Pistons line right now until Paul George, until we know if he's in or not. But whatever, that's beside the point. This is
Sure.
currently how it works, and there's a good amount of edge still. It's not what it used to be, but because of that, we need more tricks to be able to like get in faster if stuff starts to happen.
Great
And
stuff there, Matt. I totally agree. I know our team is working on ways of reading APIs and getting in the underdog stuff a little quicker than others, but that's all above my head. It's just a work in progress. So I think that covers today's slate. It's a small one. It's a weird 3-game slate that starts at 10 p.m. Eastern. So
yeah,
I know there's football tonight, but they haven't been doing that recently. So very, very strange little mini set here. Anything we want to cover before we move to futures and just kind of like macro NBA concepts, how the season's gone? Might even bring up the Jazz. I don't know.
we can bring that up in a futures context. Let's go right there. So let me see. Let's just pull up the
I'm
538
disappointed we
standings.
didn't start this show like a week before the season started because
Yeah.
we would already have a full highlight reel of Matt talking about the Jazz. But we started a couple weeks into the season. I've received all that highlight reel, and it's all stuck in my head. Matt, what is like? How did this like come about for you? This desire to wager on the Jazz so much?
Well, yeah, I guess there's an alternate universe where, I've got Kelly Olynyk behind me or Laurie Markkinen jersey with all this other collection of the reason that it's these three
No,
things.
next year. No. At the end of this season, after all your bets
Sure.
are paid off, you're going to add a Laurie Markkinen jersey.
I know. It's just the reason it's these three things, or these are the three ones I talked about publicly: the Isaiah Stewart thing, the Benintendi props, the Celtics last year. I don't have it for the Jazz, but yes, I can throw Jazz stuff up there anyway for sure. I if they make the playoffs, yeah. But before the season, on 538, the Utah Jazz were projected for 38 wins, and their over/under was 23.5. So that is the starting point. Like, I sort of trust these standings projections. There are two things. Well, there's one major thing they don't account for, and it's the changing of the roster during the season.
And that's such a hard. How do you even build that into a model of prediction? Right? It's like a really impossible task.
Yeah, you have to build in uncertainty of how many games Mike Conley will be on the team. What they do have is if a player is hurt, like part of the season is estimated with that player in, and I guess they could theoretically do that too. But the good thing is there is a tool on 538 now where you can adjust the team's rotation yourself and see a new standings projection. So I was very skeptical. Like the Hornets were projected well. The Pacers were like the Hornets were projected to be a playoff team on 538. The Pacers were projected like a border. Maybe that one is actually looking pretty decent. And then like the Nets were projected playoff bubble. The Blazers were projected playoff bubble. I still think that's true. The Lakers were projected to be terrible. And that one is an easier sell to me because it worked so well last year. They have basically the same team. But Utah was projected like high 30s in wins. And I know everyone expects them to tank. So what I did was I went into their manual adjustment and I took Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, Rudy Gay, and Kelly Olynyk off the team. I just took them off. I projected them all for 0 minutes and I filled it in with like the rest of the players. And even with that estimate, Utah was at 29 wins. So with those guys playing none of the season, that was the estimate. They were still at 29. And the over-under is 23.5. And that's their floor. At that point, I was like, 29 wins is their floor. Like, that's the situation where they just trade everybody before opening night.
And they could trade for draft picks, but sometimes they get players back, right? Like,
yeah.
like even if it's a bad player like Russell Westbrook, right? Like he's gonna go out and try to win games, even if the team's not trying to, right?
Maybe to the detriment of the team, but point
Right.
taken. Like you're not when they traded away Gobert and Mitchell, they got good players. Like
Yeah.
they got guys who actually can play. It was very weird. Like to me, this entire thing was just that everyone basically tagged the Jazz with like a sticker that said this is a tanking team.
Well, let's not
And
forget, we have to bring up the fact that this is the year to tank too, right? So
sure.
Mike G pointed out pretty early in the season to me that there's this guy, he's this Frenchman, he's like whatever, 18, 19 years old right now. He's 7'4" and he looks like Kevin Durant. He's like shooting 30-foot threes and he just looks like a unicorn amongst these, horses. So if there's
Yeah.
ever a year to tank, it's literally this year. He's a generational talent so far.
Yeah, but I guess the problem is we have a lottery system and you don't necessarily get the guy. And I think the teams know that. Like you can't. So there's some of both there, but for sure, it definitely made sense to assume tanking would be more of a priority this year than a different year. Totally agree. But nonetheless, like the Jazz didn't have the roster or even the possibility of a roster that could lose 60 plus games this year. Like it just they would have had to have essentially their 9 best players all not play for them to be like a 20-win team.
Absolutely. No, you were clearly ahead of the market here. So they started off pretty hot.
Yeah, what I didn't know is that they would be 10-6 or that they would
Right.
have started 10-3. That is totally just I did not even remotely predict that.
You know who else didn't know they were going to be 10-6? Danny Ainge.
Yeah.
He's like when they were like 9-3 or 10-3, they were asking about it. He says, "I'm not sure this is sustainable." I think he was as surprised as everybody. That roster that they had, yes, they got good players. They got good players that are perfect for trading. You look at that roster; those are all guys that like contending teams would like to add as a piece. Olynyk is a nice big who can shoot threes and stretch the floor to add as a piece if you need to fill in another big guy. Conley can play point guard for anybody. Like just go down the list. Clarkson's the heat check guy. So I think Ainge was surprised as well. You're right, Matt. The roster couldn't lose 60 or couldn't be a 20-win team as constructed. But I think Ainge thought they were going to get off to a bad start and then potentially start moving some pieces. Now, in some ways, he's stuck because the team's quote too good. But that's one you got it at what 23.5 at the start.
Yeah, well, I'll expand on that because before the season, the bets I made were over 23.5 to make the play. Then the bet was for them to make the play in at like plus 1250, and for them to make the playoffs at like 25-1.
Right.
I did not bet a lot on any of those though because my assumption was if the Jazz start like 0-4, they will very, very quickly start to look at trading options. What I wanted to do was, and I know this because futures odds, just as I followed them over the last couple of years, don't catch up to results as quickly as they should. If they did start well, they might look at the team and be like, we're not bad enough to just give away Jordan Clarkson. Point taken, like they basically have guys that would be the third or fourth best player. I mean, Lauri Markkanen ended up, it looks like he's actually better than that. But for the most part, it's a team of guys who are like number 3, number 4 options, who are like your last piece to a championship winning starting lineup. But the idea was let's see how they do right off the bat and then make the futures bets accordingly. If the Jazz had started 0-4, I would have very little on the Jazz on any of their futures. They beat Denver opening night, and I bet like a bit more. And then they beat Minnesota, and at that point they were 250-1 to win the division when they were 2-0, just having beaten the top 2 teams in their own division. And they were projected for like 41 wins at that point. So like that was the point where it's like, all right, let's start like actually looking at these. And then they went into New Orleans and won again. And now they're 3-0 against like 3 of the top teams in the West. And at that point, that was when I went like, all right, this needs to be like a big investment because the preseason odds were essentially still the odds at that point. That was the mistake. It wasn't like, yes, the preseason numbers were really bad, but the fact that they didn't adjust after the 3-0 start when it was like that kind of, we all knew it was that kind of situation. Like, the way they played at the very beginning was going to heavily dictate the trajectory of the season in terms of keeping players. And so it was that plus the fact that like Markkanen was playing so well. It's like, oh, this might be a different guy than what he used to be. And Walker Kessler might actually be good. And like Jordan Clarkson actually knows how to pass now. And the coach might be amazing. Like none of that was in the model. So all of that, they are on a 3-game losing streak now. And it kind of like hurts me a little to talk about it now because I mean, I guess like they were going to exceed the play-in. Now that is back in play for sure. And there's still a scenario where they end up as the 11 seed because the Kings are now on a winning streak. I think the worst case scenario for the Jazz now is they finish ahead of the Lakers, Spurs, Thunder, and Rockets and miss the play-in as the 11 seed. Like that's not a 0% outcome. But there was just so much value because they were 3-0 in the odds hadn't moved. That was really what happened there.
Yeah, I think there's another kind of perfect storm in terms of why the odds didn't move. That Wembanyama Scoot Henderson game happened, and Wembanyama scored 37. It was on ESPN. It was they hyped the game, so that was right in the first week of the season. So if anybody wasn't sure whether Wembanyama was for real, they watched that game and said, "All right, yeah, he's worth tanking for." I mean,
Interesting.
He's generational. He's going to be, but by the time the season comes around next year, they're going to be talking about him as they're already saying best prospect since LeBron. So I think that was part of it. That's also why, Mike, we didn't jump in. At least for me, I wasn't ready to jump in right away because I'm like, there's no agent's going to miss out on Wembanyama. Then they had that great start, and then we got in, but we got in at 27.5, I think, or 29.5. And yeah, I mean it's so like it was just a strange. I mean, Matt, you were on it, and that it's the right play to get some in, see how things go, and then add more in that spot because you're right. The future odds just don't move as fast as they should.
Yeah. You know what? I would like to think the sports books are smart enough to have watched Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson play. And like, that's the reason that the Jazz still had crazy odds to like make the playoffs and all of that. There's no chance that's what
I'm giving them too much. You're right. I'm giving them too much credit.
Like, if you were running a sports book, I think that it would be actually a pretty smart move. There's just no way that's what they were doing because they just don't update.
It's quite possible that retail bettors were just blindly betting unders on some of these teams, and it prevented the lines from moving. Because, like, when we're counter trading the public, it's not going to move the lines, right?
Yeah, it doesn't really move the lines. I mean, on a win total, yeah, like it might move it 5 cents at the book you're betting it at.
If all the sharps are on one side, it's going to go up, right? But what I'm saying is, like, it's also possible that the public is very much on these unders that are against us.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, when Donovan Mitchell got traded, the total was in the mid-30s. That was post-Gobert trade because Gobert had happened earlier. The amount of people that must have bet the Utah under from the Mitchell trade, because the sentiment for most basketball fans coming into this season is Gobert is the problem, Mitchell's great. I think that's what most people think, which I think it's the opposite. I mean, I think they're both great, but I think for most people it's like Gobert, whatever, like he can't score.
I think Mitchell's whatever.
Did you say Gobert is great?
I think Gobert and Mitchell are both great. Gobert's the best defensive center in the league. He can't play offense, but his defense is great.
Have you watched the Wolves this year?
The Wolves are not great. Yeah, I've definitely have lowered a bit from like great to maybe less great. Sure, I still think he'll turn it around. But yeah, I think so many people bet the Utah unders when Mitchell got traded that's where it came from. Like there was so much exposure for the books to those bets. They weren't going to keep they needed to like plummet the total to account for all of that. Because I think that was probably the most popular win total bet this offseason was just Jazz unders once it was clear that they were tanking, and they're not, but it seemed that way from the Mitchell trade. Yeah, so I guess like there are still stuff like this now, but with Utah,
like the play-in tournament, that was a market you had expressed interest in.
Yeah, let's look at the play-in tournament now.
So I'm actually a little rusty on this play-in tournament concept. So there's 4 teams. It's the 7, 8, 9, and 10 seeds, right? And they play the 7 and the 10 play one game. If the 7 wins, they go right in. I guess I'm messing this up. How exactly does the play-in work?
Okay, so we can talk about that, but none of that matters for the purposes of this market.
Okay.
Because the bet when you bet to make the play-in is just the team will finish the 82-game regular season seeded 7, 8, 9, or 10.
Okay.
That's the only thing that matters. After that, the 7 plays the 8, the winner's in, the loser then is waiting for another game between the 9 and 10. The 9 and 10 is single elimination for the loser.
Double win it.
Yeah, so the winner of 9-10 plays the loser of 7-8, and the winner of that gets to go in also with the winner of 7-8.
Gotcha.
But all of that is already settled by the time the play-in bet is done.
And you said this is in a few different markets, a few different books. I mean,
yeah, I'm looking at Caesars right now. Bet365 has it. I think FanDuel and DraftKings have it, although I don't know if they're live.
Bet Rivers has it too.
Bet Rivers has it too. Yeah, FanDuel and DraftKings have been like, they've had it up some days and not up other days. Bet Rivers, Bet365, and Caesars have consistently had these odds up.
All right. So, in this Western market,
yeah,
what is the order of preference here, or what is the discussion points, anyways?
Okay, so Utah is now minus 105. They were, 12, 14 to 1 before the season. You can't bet this now for Utah. Like, there's a scenario where they end up above the play-in. There's also a scenario where they end up below the play-in. Like, I don't think this is worth betting anymore. My favorite bet for this is in the Eastern Conference, but in the West, there's still one or two that I like. So I think it's really, really unlikely Portland misses the play-in outright, like 11 seed or worse. But I still don't buy them being a top 6 team. Like, their roster construction, their makeup of their players, like, these guys are not great. Like, it's a bunch of, maybe we can just look at this quickly again, but sure, Jeremy Grant could be better than the ratings are giving him credit for, but like, Lillard's he's not near MVP level player with his bad defense. Simon's also not a good defender. And overall, that's like a fine backcourt, but it's not as good as people think. Nurkic is pretty good, but like Josh Hart and Jeremy Grant are like maybe on balance slightly above average wings. Like, this is a pretty average team, I think.
Yeah, it's a bunch of mediocre guys.
With a bad bench, too. Like, the guys coming off the bench, if Gary Payton II comes back, this is, PTSD from last year talking about him with the Warriors, but that could change a lot if he plays, but apparently he just had a setback in his return. Even when he comes back, like, are they comfortable playing him more than 12 minutes a game? He's been just massively injury prone throughout his career, so I don't expect to see much of him this season. Shadon Sharp has been good, but like, has he actually, like, he looks good. He's a high draft pick, but those players tend not to be the best for actually, improving your win probability in their rookie seasons. Maybe year 2, year 3. So this is a bad bench. Drew Eubanks is just not a good center. Like, he's not DeAndre Jordan and Robin Lopez.
Yeah, I think that Nurkic situation says more about Nurkic than it does about Eubanks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Nurkic isn't healthy. Yeah, it's not that Eubanks is suddenly good.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the markets are pricing Portland at plus 140 to make the plan.
Yeah.
And you think it is probably something more like minus 150 in the 60% range.
No, that's a really good estimate for it. Yeah, I think 60% is a good number for what I think it is. So that's my favorite one currently for the West. I think the Clippers at plus 175 are interesting too, because I started betting this one actually a few weeks ago when we got the update that Kawhi Leonard was going to be out for like whatever amount of games. They were plus 400 at that point. If we look at the standings again, or the projected standings, like, who are the teams, the Clippers, and the same is true for Portland. Like, if we want to bump Utah down to the play-in, fine, but okay, we've got Memphis, Denver, or is this cut off a bit? All right, I'll move up. Memphis, Denver, Phoenix, and Dallas, I think we can say, are in the top 6, like, almost certainly. And then New Orleans looks like they'll get there. Utah, Golden State, like, the Clippers have to pass those teams to avoid the play-in. They have to pass 2 of them, right? If I've done the math right. There's 7 of them there. Yeah, and then they have to stay ahead of Portland, Minnesota too, which is not a lock. Like, they're in the same category as those teams. So I don't know why, like, looking at the odds again, why are the Clippers longer odds for the play-in than, like, I mean, it's started to move, but they're not better than New Orleans. without Kawhi. Like I think what we're looking at is the odds makers are still pricing in a soon-ish return for Kawhi Leonard, which I don't think is very likely. Like he could be out, who knows.
He has not played a lot of basketball recently, that's for sure.
No, he's played like 1.5 games this year or something like that. So
came off the bench for one of them or something.
Yeah, and even if he's back, there's no back-to-backs happening. His minutes are going to be low.
How old is he now? Also, like there was Kawhi MVP talks. Call it 2020, 2019, but
Kawhi was picked as like a dark horse MVP guy this year, which I thought was insane because there was no way he was going to play the number of games that would be necessary for that. But yeah, he's like, it's not just age, it's the mileage, it's the playoff minutes, it's the injuries. The ACL recovery has not gone well for him. So I think the Clippers are interesting here. I think the Blazers are the much better bet though. Because Leonard could come back and they could wind up in the top 6. I think it's less likely for Portland. But the East has the one bet that I think is really, really good.
Yeah, I was gonna say let's move it over to the East because I feel like we've exhausted the West for now.
So you can tell that this has moved today because of how this is ordered for the Pacers, because they're sandwiched between the plus 750 and the plus 1200 teams, but their odds are only 550. They were plus 750 yesterday. They were the same as Charlotte. I guess that game probably flipped the odds, but whatever. At 550, this is still far too high for Indiana. We'll do another bounce back to the standings over here to the projected ones. So the current projected 7 seed there is Cleveland, actually. So Cleveland 7, Nets 8, Knicks 9, Pacers 10. So we're looking at like essentially those last 2 spots. I think the Nets and Cavs will straighten it out, and like we're not worrying about one of those teams falling to 11 or 12 or 13. It's kind of, I think, a battle for 2 spots between the Knicks, Pacers, Bulls, and Hornets and Wizards. And the Bulls just
five teams for 2 spots.
5 teams for 2 spots, but the Hornets may be out of that very soon because LaMelo Ball just re-injured his already injured ankle last night.
He rolled his ankle on a fan.
Is that what it was? A fan?
It was a fan. I didn't watch the clip. That was the Underdog reporting.
Okay.
But Underdog reported he stepped on a fan's foot on the side.
Well, that's fun. So that's unfortunate because the Hornets were one of the teams I liked at long odds to make the playoffs before the season. They're not at this point.
Yeah, LaMelo is really good and really helps that team.
Yeah, and Gordon Hayward's out. Cody Martin, who's kind of good, is also out. Who knows if they trade Terry Rozier and make him an injury.
Let's pretend it's down to 4 teams for 2 spots then.
Yeah, so I think the Pacers are better than the Wizards. I think they are right there with the Knicks and Bulls. The issue with the Pacers is they might trade Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, but
same conversation with Utah is we had to assume the Pacers were looking to be sellers this year. We know they have this Miles Turner contract that I think expires. He becomes a free agent if I recall correctly, and he has some value left. They got to get something. So, how does this team look in February? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know either. But what I will say is like the players we're talking about them potentially trading are not that good. Miles Turner kind of is. He's got like a 2.0 player rating, but they can play Isaiah Jackson. They can play Goga Bitadze. Like it's a big drop off, but it's not like a season ruining drop off. They can still make the play in even without Miles Turner. If they start playing Terry Taylor at center again, they're not going to make it. Because I think all 3 of those centers I just mentioned were injured last year. Turner and Bitadze and Jackson, at least for a portion of the year. So part of like the anti-Pacers bias that they can't protect the rim is because they were using Jalen Smith and Terry Taylor as the centers. That is not going to go well. But with, just Jackson and Bitadze, like it could be okay. And then Buddy Hield is pretty negligible in terms of his value for wins and losses. Like they've got Chris Duarte, they've got Mathurin, obviously they have Halliburton. Those guys might all be better anyway. So I don't really care about Hield. It's more, do they trade Turner or not? And by the time they trade him, even if we assume they're definitely going to trade him, they may be 5 games ahead of Chicago and Washington. So
what are your thoughts on Halliburton remaining a Pacer?
I think he kind of has to. Like, he's playing so well. I don't know that there's an offer that exists that would be enough for them. Like, they want Wembanyama, but like, is Wembanyama more valuable than Tyrese Halliburton right now?
Yes,
To a franchise, I think so.
but
I think it's like a conversation.
Sure.
I don't know. I would disagree, but it's not Wembanyama. It's a 14 at best, a 14% chance at Wembanyama. So they love that backcourt. They love. I don't see them moving Halliburton. They like the two of those guys. That's their building blocks. I think if they could, they'd love to keep those guys and miss the play-in, so at least they have a shot at Wembanyama. But
Sure.
and that's where I think they're at. I'd be shocked if they moved Halliburton.
Yeah, I think I'd be shocked if they keep Buddy Hield, but I'd be shocked if
Yeah.
they move Halliburton.
I was gonna say I'd be shocked if they keep Hield and Turner, and I'd be shocked if they trade Halliburton.
Yeah, so we're on the same page. So, we could do this. Like, I actually had looked at the Pacers before the season. What happens if you take Hield and Turner off the team? They lose like 3 wins
Fair enough.
for both of them. That was for a whole year. At this point, it's like 2 wins because we're already a chunk into the season. So, the only way the Pacers can get like a lot worse is if Halliburton got injured, really, is the only
Sure.
realistic scenario. So what I will say there is the floor for the Pacers is far lower than the Knicks or the Bulls or the Wizards because
But the upside's also there.
the upside is
That's
just as
that's
high.
why it's priced differently.
Exactly. The upside is there, but we don't care about the floor. Like, we're not betting the Pacers, to avoid being the worst record in the NBA. Like, we're betting not a median. We're betting something that's above their median. So, like, the floor is basically irrelevant here. And I just think the Bulls are bad. Like, I don't know why people like this team. Like, they just don't have good players. Like, I don't really understand. It's it was confusing last year how they won as much as they did. I guess they were well coached, but like, DeRozan doesn't play any defense. He's kind of inefficient offensively. Vucevic is exactly the same. Levine is like also the same. Caruso is a great defender, but not much on offense. Like, they're just not better than these teams. So if we go back to the odds, like, the Bulls are, can we see it on screen? Yeah, okay. The Bulls are minus 140 to make the play-in. Like, that looks pretty terrible. I'd rather take the Knicks at minus 110 if anything, but like, and then the Wizards are minus 125. Like, even if we say the Pacers are just a fraction worse than those, the odds are so much higher there. And then I think there are other sites that have it higher than 550 right now. This is just the first one I pulled up.
Matt, I got one interesting one to throw at you.
Okay.
Similar but slightly different topic as it relates to the play-in. The Bulls are minus 109 to miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
So to lose that bet, they'd have to. I mean, they could make the play-in, but lose in the play-in, and you can still win that bet. Because I know we've been talking about making the play-in itself, but the Bulls they either have to be the 6th seed or better, or they'd have to win one of the 2 spots from the play-in. So them to miss the playoffs at 109 is actually looking like there's value there.
Yeah, I think that's a good one too.
Do you agree?
Yeah, for sure. So that's when I have it like plus 105 from before the season, which is only marginally better. And I've been looking at that one as like, it's probably worth adding a bit because it's not a huge bet. Yeah, like, there's no way they're near 50%. I mean, if you go by what 538 has here, they're 21%. I think because the Pacers' floor is lower for potential trades, like, and because the Hornets are going to essentially fall off of this, they're going to fall off of this like list of teams with any probability. Maybe the Bulls are more like 30 to 40%, but yeah, minus 109 looks good. Definitely in that range.
No arguments here. Well, we have reached our stopping point for today, if that is fine with the gentleman I'm with. Awesome conversation, Matt. Thanks for joining, Mike. Always appreciate that. It is really fun talking this out loud with you guys and recording it now to make it a little more official. So looking forward to adding some more jerseys in the background. Looking forward to adding my own Isaiah Stewart jersey. We'll get into that story one day. I promise. It's a good one. So thanks again, Matt.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. Also.